When working at the buffet's carving station, engage the customers with small talk like this.
I'd be happy to cut that roast beef for you, but would you rather talk about All-Star Superman?
Or this.
Have you decided what you'll have for dessert? Or which issue of All-Star Superman is your favorite?
Try and focus on the work.
Did you catch the game last night? I didn't. I was reading All-Star Superman. It's my favorite.
Carve up the prime rib.
I'm sorry to hear that you got food poisoning here. Would you like to sit down and talk about my favorite comic book with me?
Carve up the turkey now.
Oh, hi. You caught me working at Old Country Buffet. Would you prefer to talk about All-Star Superman with me? Let's do that. Hello! Welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Folks, I think it's time that I tell you why All-Star Superman is the best Superman story. Alright, it's at least just my personal favorite. Now, this was the 5th collaboration between writer Grant Morrison and artist Frank Quitely, and I believe that it resulted in a timeless take on Superman, a definitive take. This is a new story, it's a fun story, and at the same time, it pays deliberate reverence to the Superman stories of the Golden and Silver Age. This is just fun, folks. It also gets to the core qualities of Superman. It reinforces his intelligence, his strength, and his compassion. If you're new to the channel, or now that I think of it, even if you've watched before and you've never done this before, please consider hitting subscribe. That really helps push this to new viewers if you like it. And if you like it, I'd also appreciate hitting the like button. That's a pretty small ask, I think. But without me talking about any more preamble, let's get into All-Star Superman. All-Star Superman was born out of DC Comics' All-Star imprint, launched in 2005. That imprint aimed to present iconic characters in standalone stories free from the constraints of ongoing continuity. I think it was one of then-publisher Dan DiDio's best ideas, but ultimately, only 2 books were created under that banner, All-Star Superman and the unfinished All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder by Frank Miller and Jim Lee. The goal of the All-Star line was to deliver accessible, high-quality comics by top creators that captured the essence of these heroes. Morrison, a lifelong Superman fan, and Quitely, known for his meticulous and expressive art, were chosen to helm the Superman title following their successful collaborations on titles like We 3 and New X-Men. Morrison's pitch for All-Star Superman was to create a Superman story that distilled the character's mythic qualities, celebrated his history, and made him relatable yet godlike. They wanted to avoid the gritty, deconstructionist trends of modern comics and instead embrace Superman's optimism, heroism, and humanity. In a recent interview with the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast, Grant stated that Superman needs to be a man of action that gets things done. I interpret that to mean that Grant thinks Superman does not need to be reimagined to be relevant. He just needs to be approached with consistency and to make sure that he lives up to being super. And speaking of super things, let me thank the super sponsor of this episode. This is sponsored by Palace of the Golden Princess Issue 3 by Pocket Jacks Comics. Now, this is a fantasy comic based on the infamous 1981 role-playing module that TSR actually had destroyed because of its S&M content. And in this case, S&M does not stand for Superman. Issue 3 follows Thora, a knight within an evil kingdom ruled by the wicked Queen Erica Fallenstar, and it definitely pushes the boundaries of what you can expect out of a protagonist. Thora is rebelling against the society that she exists within, and she makes some questionable choices that you probably have not come across before. If a sexy fantasy comic sounds up your alley, you can check that out in the link below. I've also printed it here on the screen. And as with previous campaigns, It's got a lot of things that it offers. You can get either PDF or print versions of this comic with multiple variant covers. You can also get things like limited edition prints. You can get previous issues, 1 and 2 here. I would be very curious to hear your opinions on this comic if you've read it. And with all that said, I think it's time to get back to talking about All-Star Superman. The first issue gets the ball rolling by introducing a ticking clock for Superman. He saves a crew of scientists who are studying the sun up close, and he ends up getting overloaded with deadly solar radiation poisoning. The same star that grants Superman his abilities is now killing him. And, facing his own mortality, Superman sets to work on completing tasks to make sure the world will be okay without him there. It's also revealed that criminal mastermind Lex Luthor manipulated events to get Superman into this position. Each issue is able to focus on Superman working on a different task, which Morrison's story explicitly refers to as the 12 labors of Superman. There is one issue that has Superman from the future coming back in time and mentioning this, which is a tip of the hat to Superman's ongoing legacy. The 12-issue structure was directly inspired by the mythical 12 labors of Hercules, and each issue highlights a different facet of Superman's character. Morrison wanted this book to be episodic, yet cohesive, with recurring themes, like the sun is both life-giver and life-taker. In their 2011 book, Super Gods, Morrison said that they saw Superman as a metaphor for humanity's best qualities, their ingenuity, their selflessness, whereas the antagonist Lex Luthor represents the worst in humanity, their selfishness and their pettiness. Morrison's process for crafting a perfect Superman story was deeply rooted in their lifelong fascination with Superman, particularly the Silver Age stories of the 1950s and 60s, which were filled with whimsical, imaginative concepts like Bizarro, Crypto, and the bottle city of Kandor. For instance, one issue of All-Star Superman features Superman dealing with 2 other suitors for Lois Lane's affections, the super-strong Samson and Atlas. That is a reference to issue 279 of Action Comics, which I recently reviewed in my Silver Age Madness episode. Another issue of All-Star Superman features Superman relying on his fellow Kryptonians from the shrunken bottle city of Kandor. They fight his cancerous blood cells inside his body. The issue ends with Superman sending out his miniature superpowered people to fight cancer in a children's hospital. That whole story is an updated take on Superman issue 125, which featured Superman getting new superpowers from an alien, including the ability to summon tiny miniature versions of himself out of his hands. Pretty weird. The issues of All-Star Superman lean into the sci-fi origins of Superman, with Superman relying on his robots and crafting potions like a super serum that grants Lois Lane superpowers for 24 hours. One issue has Superman meeting 2 other Kryptonians, a couple that were daredevil explorers, astronauts. Morrison wrote them as Scottish bruisers who cannot comprehend why Superman would live among human beings instead of rebuilding Krypton and ruling humanity as their leader. There's a wonderful story turn in that issue where it's revealed that the astronauts have kryptonite poisoning and Superman saves them by sending them to Krypton's prison, the Phantom Zone. However, the astronauts are grateful for Superman's ingenuity and they learn from his compassion. And now also, the Phantom Zone will finally have some law and order. Superman faces some familiar enemies like Bizarro and Lex Luthor, but there's also a range of new enemies like Krull from an underground race of dinosaur people, and, importantly, an artificial evil sun. Some of the issues feature beautiful quiet moments, like Superman's visit to his adoptive parents, the Kents, and a story where Superman was not able to save his father from a heart attack, but which features a unique twist, which gives Superman the ability to say goodbye. A lot of the stories feature clever twists or at least beautiful character work. One of my favorite issues has Lex Luthor on death row in prison, Lex is using it to boast about his accomplishments. But we also get to understand a bit of his jealousy is justified. Lex is easily one of the smartest men on the planet, and also spends hours working out. And he despises how Superman doesn't have to work for his gifts. He just receives them by virtue of being powered by the sun. We learn in that issue that Superman is hiding how he's constantly saving people with his acts of clumsiness when he plays the part of Clark Kent. There's several moments throughout the series where no one notices that Clark has saved them from an accident, except for us, the reader. And there are beautiful moments in some of these stories, like where Superman shows his incredible compassion in this page. He saves the life of a suicidal teen. If we pay attention to the story, we see earlier that there's a bystander that Superman saved from an accident who is desperately trying to call his patient. Superman must have heard this. Every issue of this series features amazing adventure, cool sci-fi twists, and some really heartwarming empathy. Now, the story isn't always going to hold your hand and explain everything. It took me a couple reads to realize, for instance, that suicidal teen related to another character that Superman had saved, but, was delayed because of an accident. There's some things that I don't always fully understand. I will admit to that. For instance, there's a pair of issues where Bizarro exists as some sort of infection, and I'm not 100% clear on where that originated. So it's not always going to hold your hand there. I don't mind that too much because most of them I do get and I love, and, your mileage will vary. Some ideas, like the Bizarros as an infection, are big, and other ideas are small but funny and make sense on a character level. For example, Lex Luthor supposedly lost all his hair in an accident when he was younger. In All-Star Superman, at one point, we see that Lex is missing an eyebrow. And that's because he always draws them on. He's lost all of his hair. He's had an eyebrow smudged off, and Lex has to quickly draw in a new eyebrow. The attention to character detail from artist Frank Quitely is on another level. Quitely believably portrays Superman and Clark Kent with a similar build, but a different posture. I've got an entire episode dedicated to discussing Quitely's techniques, but this is one of my favorite examples of how to make a character look both very different and at the same time plausibly the same person. Quitely lays out big reveals in splash pages. He guides the eye across pages with intuitive motion, like this big spread where Clark and Lex make their way through a prison. And there are multiple images of the characters. This is an example of what I call the De Luca technique after Italian artist Gianni De Luca. There are pages that have intricate environmental detail, wide panels that imply widescreen epic action, and subtle gesture to reflect characters in deep contemplation. I believe this comic is visually beautiful. This perfectionism by Quitely is also part of why the 12 issues came out from 2005 through 2008. But to DC's credit, they allowed Morrison and Quitely the 3-year period to emphasize quality. All-Star Superman was a deliberate rejection of the grim and gritty deconstructionist stories that had been popular for the previous 20 years. Instead, Morrison and Quitely wanted to tell an upbeat story where Superman is an aspirational figure. He does good because he wants to. That's just how he was raised. And I think that emotional truth at the core is part of what helps these crazy sci-fi stories still grounded and relatable. In a 2011 interview with The Scotsman, Morrison spoke about how All-Star Superman was about Superman deciding what to do with the time he has left. Morrison also mentioned how the emotions in the story came from a real place, stating, quote, "The words that Clark Kent speaks at the funeral were what I wanted to say about my own dad, showing me how to be tough, how to be kind, and how to dream of a better world. It made me cry to write it, and I still cry when I read it." One of my favorite elements of All-Star Superman is how it doesn't rely on Superman's origin story. It just gives us new adventures that emphasize the character's core qualities. Superman's origin story is boiled down to just a single page. Superman's origin story is a fantastic coming-of-age story, but here the origin story is boiled down to just a single page, and that in and of itself is a great homage to the original Golden Age comics by Superman's creators, Siegel and Schuster. Instead of rehashing a great but well-known origin story, we get stories that lean into Superman's intelligence. An example is how he battles a Lex Luthor who has stolen Superman's 24-hour superpower serum. Superman speeds up how fast the powers work by blasting away at Lex with a gravity gun. Physics tell us gravity literally affects time. An early issue features Superman turning evil thanks to black kryptonite, and his pal Jimmy Olsen injects himself with a monster serum to slow Superman down until their scientist friend Dr. Quintum can reverse things. Jimmy turned into all sorts of wild monsters in the Silver Age. In the modern age, one of Superman's allies is Dr. Hamilton. Dr. Quintum is an update on that idea. He represents the best of humanity's experiments with science, having a noble heart and a conscience. Are there critiques about All-Star Superman? Absolutely. For me, they don't amount to much, but I will say that some folks may not care for Frank Quitely's artwork. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I love it, but I can understand if it's not to somebody's tastes. Some people may not care for the upbeat, positive tone. Maybe that's not what they're looking for in superhero comics. But for me, I think that emotional resonance and the high concept ideas combine to form a modern classic. Every time I reread All-Star Superman, I find new layers to uncover and appreciate. It took me several reads to realize Morrison had turned the All-Star title literal by having Superman end the story flying into the sun to rebuild it, becoming a literal star. Other great things I slowly noticed beyond the plot of each issue include the amount of love and compassion shown. The love that Superman shows to others is reflected back on him. His co-worker, Steve Lombard, acts like a jerk at the office, but he's also the first guy to check on an injured Clark Kent and shows genuine concern for him. Lex Luthor begins to see the world the way Superman sees it once he gets superpowers, and Lex learns that each other is really all we have in this great big universe. Also, a monstrous Sun Eater is taught compassion by Superman's kindness and aids him in a battle. Morrison has said they see Superman as a man of action, in reference to the comic book title that Superman was born in, Action Comics. Early Golden Age stories had Superman taking on slumlords and car manufacturers, sticking up for the little guy without hesitation. All-Star Superman takes place on a bigger scale, but features Superman doing stuff. He believes he won't be around for long, which is what motivates him. But it's also just cool seeing Superman dash around saving people. The comic was a big success, to be clear. It won 2 Eisners. In 2006, it won Best New Series. In 2008, it won Best Continuing Series. Sales were phenomenal. It was always in the top 10, usually in the top 3. And the reviews for it are very, very positive in general. Like, very, very strong. So it's definitely a successful book. I think it's a heartfelt take on the character. Sorry, I'm just admiring the artwork. I can't help it. I really, really like this comic. I think it's a great way of using Superman to portray humanity at its best. And it's just fun. I am done. I'm going to wrap things up, but I would love to hear from you what your favorite Superman stories are. Some others that I love, I happen to love in the 90s when Superman got electric powers. A lot of people don't like that. I thought it was an interesting take on the character. I really love the John Byrne run. I love the Alan Moore stories. He's got one that's basically the final Superman story that they told right before Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted DC continuity and history. Great final 2 issues of Superman. And there's also a fantastic story that's been adapted into animation and adapted into other forms. It's called What Do You Get for the Man Who Has Everything? And it's an episode where Wonder Woman, Batman, and Robin go to celebrate Superman's birthday at the Fortress of Solitude, only to find that the villain Mongol has subdued Superman with this plant. A plant that's stuck on Superman's chest that puts him in a dreamlike state where he imagines he's living his perfect life. Great, great story. But yeah, I'd love to hear what your favorite Superman story is. I'll talk to you a little bit more about some Superman stuff over my closing credits. But as far as All-Star Superman goes, thank you for listening to my points on it, and I'll see you soon. Remember, keep reading comics. All right, everybody, thank you very much for being with me while I take a look at one of my very favorite comic books. Very fun to talk about. I could easily just go on and on, but it would mostly just be me recapping. And I want you to be able to discover it yourself if you haven't already. Or if you haven't read it in a while, trust me, go back and read it. Cool thing, when it was coming out originally, there were delays, right? Fortunately, because of its episodic nature, it wasn't a big deal. You get a new issue and you get a full story. So it was cool. But I do think that you have the advantage now of getting the whole series and reading it all at once, and I'm a little jealous. The idea of discovering it all at once, that's an exciting concept. I recommend this hardcover collection. While I've got the original issues, I did get this because it's just an easy way to read it. Plus, there are a bunch of background notes, little essays by Morrison. You get behind-the-scenes sketches by both Morrison and Frank Quitely, some descriptions of what the goals were with certain characters. I think it's a really nice addition. I do recommend that. If you want some more Superman content by me, just so you know, my friend Jim Mafood, professional comic book artist and writer, and I, we do a show on my second channel sometimes. My second channel is called Comic Tropes After Dark, and we do a show called Trash Movie Bonanza. We've just recorded one on the 1984 live-action Supergirl movie. So that's being edited, but it should be out before this new Superman movie. Trying to be hopeful. I would love a good Superman movie. That would be very cool. But I think that you'll have fun listening to Jim and I talk about Supergirl. What a weird, weird movie. Thanks so much, everybody. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.